is I went to school to study clinical psychology in the brain, right? So I've got a lot of interest in neuroscience, and especially now today with all of the neuroscience they have and how we learn, like how you can actually more effectively teach what's encoding, what's not, what's consolidation, how can we teach for better retention, like that's what I'm into. Right? So, and there's a guy named Anders Ericsson, you know, it's called Pete. He's an expert. He's been studying this for 40 to 50 years, and he's an expert on experts. Right? So he basically looked at who's really, really good at anything. Right? So it would be a Tom Brady, or you guys, Russell Wilson, or a chess player, or a musician. Like, who's the best in the world? And all he has done is studied them and said, what do they have in common? How did they get there? And that's a lot of what this talks about, right? So at this point, they've got tons of research that says, all you gotta do is do it, right? And they have college kids do it all the time, and they say, if this is what you wanna be, do this research, do this feedback, and you will see progress. You will see improvement in the performance, okay? So that's what this talks about. And then by the end, so I'm gonna, I have to come up with a topic to show you, right, to role model how it works. And I thought, you're just too diverse, right? Because if I give you a sailing example, the folks who don't sail won't get it, right? If I give you a climbing one, the folks who aren't climbers won't get it. And I thought, well, probably most of you know something about splinting, right? If you're leading in the outdoors, you've probably taken a wilderness first aid, you've probably taken some kind of wilderness medicine. So, and I teach a lot of wilderness medicine, so I said, okay, great. I'm going to show you how I would teach how to splint, right? And then I'm going to give you feedback on how to get better at that, right? And then I'm going to say, okay, so that's, and then I'm going to have you practice it. So I'm going to have a little video of a splint, of a person presenting a splint, and I want you to figure out what would you say to them to make them get better, okay? And then you'll practice that, okay? And then at the very end, I'll say, and here's hopefully how you can apply this to whatever skill set or intellectual that you might be teaching yourself. Okay, so that's the background of this talk. Do I have an automatic clicker? Do you know, Nick? Just so I don't have to always go up here. Oh, it's this right? Right? Well, he's fixing that. Well, he's working with that. So a little bit on my background. As I mentioned, I teach the wilderness first responder, and a lot of wilderness first responder called the woofer. And the reason that I'll bring that up is, one back here, is I had a really good opportunity. This is great for me. So I'm from Alaska, right? I flew down for this, and I'm one of the few wilderness first responder instructors in Alaska. Like, this is mainland Alaska, not southeast with Juneau's, you know, Sitka. In mainland Alaska, there just aren't many of us. Why does that make a difference? Because I've been teaching woofer for almost 25 years, and I get to see the same people over and over and over. I mean, seriously, it's like I teach 4 to 6 research a year up there. I teach 4 to 6 woofers a year up there. And so I get to see you, so if I say more or less 20 people a course, right? So I'm going to put 100 people through a woofer, and in 3 years, I get to evaluate my own work. And it was wild. I never thought about that, but now because I've been doing it for 30 years, I got better, right? I basically, like, I teach all you, and I think, and then this is what I think of as a teacher, because all of you, I'm guessing, are teachers, and this is the assumption. My assumption is you're a teacher, and you're going to teach to somebody who wants to get better, okay? So, and if that's an incorrect assumption, again, you might be in the wrong workshop. Okay, so I wanted you to get better as woofers, okay? And I teach you, and I think I'm pretty good, and then I go home, my husband says, hey, how'd class go? How did it go? Oh, pretty good. I think they learned a lot. And then 3 years later, you come back, and you kind of sucked. Right? And it's like, if out of 18, totally for real, there have been times where I have 18 people in a class, and all 18 went through my woofer. I can't blame this on you. Right? It can't be. 1 or 2 of you get it wrong, 3 of you get it wrong, that's your bad. But when 15, 16, 17 you get it wrong, that's my bad, right? That was awesome for me. It was a mirror in my face. And I spent 30 years getting better, right? And then I started looking into the neuroscience of it. And it's like, how do we make these people better? And I have totally changed how I teach now, right? And I think I'm a much better teacher, and everybody tells me I'm a much better teacher. And a lot of people will say I challenge them, right? I don't want to get away with anything, right? Especially when it comes to the looker, because I do this talk, and the other one I'll talk today is performing under pressure. What I really want you to be is good under pressure, right? The skill sets that I tend to teach are how can you find it in there and pull it out effectively and accurately under a heated situation, right? So that's often what I'm trying to teach for, and so I have very specific skill sets or methodology that I use to get there, okay? So the goal of this one is right here, to become more effective at delivering feedback that improves progress and performance, which can be behavioral or cognitive, intellectual, right? The objectives, I'm going to describe, first of all, I have to tell you a little bit about how we learn. It's a little bit about the brain science, but I'm going to use Bloom's taxonomy as far as how data enters. And the emphasis of that, and why does that matter, is very commonly teachers, we think, once I teach you something, like right now I'm kind of teaching you a little bit about Bloom, that when I tell you about it, that it's in there and it's encoded. And that's probably wrong, right? There's certain techniques that you have to do to make sure, that Bloom's over there. When I'm just talking about it, I'm just helping you become familiar, okay? That doesn't mean you now understand it. That only means that it's now I've planted a seed. Now you have to sow the seed, right? So now I have to work quite hard at making you recall or repeat that information. That is how learning works. And the more you do that, the more it encodes, and then it consolidates, and then it moves into a different part of the brain so it's in there for retention, right? We have to focus on recall, and that's probably where most instructors fail, is you don't spend enough time on that step, okay? And as far as understanding, if you are not yet at the level of understanding, then certain techniques that you use are imposed. Right? If you haven't yet gone through this progression and I start asking you these questions or put this challenge to you, I'm setting you up for failure. Because it's your teaching progression, right? And we all kind of intuitively do that when it comes to things like knots and belay. We're going to do a horizontal belay, and then we're going to do a vertical belay. That's sequential teaching and learning. But we should do that in everything we teach, right? And I'll give you examples of how people aren't doing that. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about this mental representation, and that's what Anders Ericsson, the expert on expertise, he says, if you don't have that, you're never going to get that good. And he said so he came up with like 3 bullet points of what do all really, really, really high quality performers have in common. And he said, number 1, a mental representation. You have to have a mental representation if you want to get good. And I'm going to talk about what does that mean? What is that, okay? I'm going to talk about, so that's the content of the delivery. So I say, I'm going to give you feedback. Can you remind me of your name? Dave. So Dave, I'm going to give Dave feedback. I have to have the content of the feedback, and then I have to have the delivery of the feedback, okay? So I'm going to go over both. Here's how you get the content. This is what I want to tell you to make you better. And then I say, the delivery is what I call a toast. I'm going to give you a toast. I'm going to make it tactful. I'm going to make sure it's objective feedback, blah, 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 right? So I got a little bit there. I'll say, here's how you deliver it, okay? And then at the end, I'm hoping and guessing that you guys will be able to come up with a couple examples for yourself that you can take home so that you can actually do this and common mistakes that teachers tend to make, okay? So that's what you're getting into. So let's start with Benjamin Bloom. Over here. So Bloom, this is not super important information, but he was an educator, but a psychologist in like the 50s. And before neuroscience, he was pretty darn good. He guessed pretty good at how we learn, right? So right now, if you've never heard of Bloom's, if you've never heard of this stuff, this is new information, right? You are now becoming familiar with it. Everybody has to become familiar with something at the very first time, right? Imagine people who never saw an airplane, and they see an airplane. You must become familiar with that thing before you can fly it, right? So you have to become familiar first. Familiarity is very commonly presented in a lecture, just like I'm doing, right? So if all you're doing is lecturing, you're probably stuck with familiarity, okay? But we can also teach familiarity through a videotape. I can actually have you do something. I can show you something, but I just need you to become familiar with knot time, weather, bear safety, how to pack a pack, whatever it is, right? You just have to become familiar with it. And now it's in there, right? And what I'll say, if you do the talk I do later today, it's actually gonna, right now, all the data I'm giving you is going into your hippocampus. It's kind of like a little teacup, it's kind of like a thumb drive, right? You got a little thumb drive, and whether or not that thumb drive encodes in the brain has to do with whether or not you sleep well tonight, right? And that's all the new science of sleeping. There's this little thing in the middle of your brain called the hippocampus, and the hippocampus is going to be full by the end of the day, and you got a lot of new data. And when you go to sleep, they call it a spindle, and this light comes up and goes to the prefrontal cortex, and your hippocampus goes and then it's empty, right? Absolutely seriously. They have now learned that if you take a nap midday, you learn better, okay? Because you can upload your hippocampus and now you're empty again, okay? So we have to first load it into, thank you, load it into the hippocampus right here, okay? Next thing we have to do is we got to make sure the brain can find it, right? Because the brain doesn't want superfluous information. It's like, no, that's right, I don't care about that. So we got to make sure that the brain understands this is important. You need to know what this is, right? Because I can give you a random number. Remember this random number, and then by tonight, she probably won't remember it. By tomorrow morning, you probably won't remember it. A year from now, I can't imagine her remember it. What's the difference? If that's all you're doing with teaching, you are not getting through the code, okay? So now what we have to do is we need to make sure that brain understands the importance of that information. And the way the brain works is through repetition, right? So there's certainly techniques, methodology to make the recall work better, okay? But a lot of it is just, you need to keep telling me. You need to keep practicing. I'll talk a little bit more about that technique later. But we have to do that in order for it to encode in the brain and to consolidate in the brain. Because if we don't have that, we're not going to have long-term retention. Okay? Once you have all of that stuff in place, now we can achieve the level of understanding that we're looking for. Okay? And that's a much deeper level of understanding, so it doesn't count on memorization. Right? I don't want you to memorize how to build a splint. I want you to understand, why are we doing it? What's the purpose of it? Right? Because then you can look at her splint and go, oh, no, I don't think this is right. Remember, we got to do this, because you understand everything behind the concept. Okay? And then when you're really good at a lot of different concepts, then you can critically think, which means you can effectively resolve damned if you do, damned if you don't conflicts. Right? You can problem solve. You can deal with really difficult situations. Given what you do, given what most of the Mountaineers do on your trips and where you're going, when it comes to you becoming a good leader, right? You might be the student who's actually trying to get good at this. Usually we're trying to achieve this, okay? In behaviors, we would call that competence usually, right? So I want you to become competent at math and compass. I want you to become competent at your mechanical advantage systems. Right? So again, I could say a novice is, you don't even know what a mechanical advantage system is. What 2-to-1s are, what 3-to-1s are, okay? Now I teach you, I show you, I let you touch it, now you do it, you practice it, then you move up here, right? And now when you can do it without anybody helping you, you can do it with no aids, no prompts, and you can even jury rig, because maybe you don't have the right stuff. That means you're right here. Right? And I would guess that for most of you, that's what you're trying to achieve. Okay? So that's what progress would look like, but if you add all the details, now it starts to get a little more messy. So this is another example of what I mean. So, and the reason I'm bringing all this up is that this is the progress that you would want to make, whether it's you progressing or your students. And you guys can all have access to these slides if you want. Okay? So I teach a lot of bear safety. Where I live, we have a lot of bears. Bears in my yard, we got bears all over the place. So let's say you're going to come to Alaska, you're going to visit me, I'm going to teach you about bear safety, okay? So right off the bat as a teacher, I need to realize that you might not have any understanding of why bear attacks happen, and you might even learn the wrong stuff, right? So if you came in with incorrect data, then I have to understand that actually might make it more difficult for you to progress, right? Because I kind of have to unteach you wrong information, okay? So now that I've taught you about bears, I can teach about black bears and white bears and brown bears and who cares. But it's like you said, It's about bear behavior, why do bears attack? We're not usually prey to them. It's usually a matter of you surprise them. You come between a sow and a cub. You stumble upon their food source, right? So I'll give you all of that. Again, that's in your familiarity. And actually, let me back up a little bit. So my idea of what good would look like is that you know how to prevent an encounter, you know how to deal with an encounter, and you know how to deal with an attack. Right? So I want to make sure that you get all of that in there. Okay? And then I'm going to have you recall it all to me, so without prompts, you can recall that information. Right? That's what I would expect. And I'll do that a little bit more when we practice, is when a big mistake people tend to make is that they don't allow the person to make that mistake. Right? So what's your name? Mary. So if I ask Mary to give me some information, and she only gives me partially correct information, then I call her on it. Right? Which very commonly, like I might say when I get to the splinting, somebody will say, oh, well, I think this is a good splint and here's why. But there were actually things that were missing in the splint. Don't go, yes, you're right, and don't forget, I just filled in the blank for her. Right? So I need to make sure that she can recall all of the information on her own, and I'm going to hold her to that standard. Okay? With understanding, not only do I have the solid grasp of bear behavior, but I probably can do prevention, I can do non-aggressive encounters, I can do aggressive encounters. You're pretty darn good at it, and you're much more apt to think under pressure. Okay? If you really wanted to get to critical thinking, you might actually have a really good idea of all wildlife behavior, not just bears. Right? So you're very good at predator-prey understanding and how to act around those animals, blah, blah, blah. Okay? If we go to, now I make it really scary, don't worry, I'll go through all this. Right? This would be an example of Bloom's taxonomy with splinting. So this is the example I'm going to use, without using all these words like this, to say, I'm assuming that you have all at least become familiar with a splint. Right? So somewhere back here, somewhere in your life, you've seen a splint, you probably built a splint, you know what a splint is. But really what I'm going to do now is I'm going to test your recall to see why would you splint. Right? So first of all, there's like 3 things that I want to know is, can you assess when would you splint? Right? Because you don't want to splint everything. Number 2, what do you anticipate? What might go wrong over time? Because in medicine, that's important. Okay? And then so both of those are cognitive. Right? And then the third one is the behavior of splinting. And I'm actually going to evaluate your splint. But I'm also going to evaluate your thinking process. Because if you're thinking wrong and you're splinting on something that shouldn't be splinted, that's wrong. Right? So I'm going to evaluate both parts of that. Because if I go way down here, and I say, what is understanding? You fully understand why you splint certain things and why you don't splint other things. You understand what it is you're afraid of. So when it comes to a forearm, for example, the primary concern is ischemia or perfusion in the hand. Right? If you break the forearm, which is what we're going to do in a second here, okay, you're not going to get a shock, you're not going to die. But if you get a bunch of swelling, it's going to pinch the neurovascular bundle, and you don't have good circulation up here. Like, that's totally our concern. And if you're going to be good at this, you need to know that. Right? So I have to evaluate that and say, hey, John, tell me, why do you splint? What's our primary concern? And he should be able to tell me that. Okay? Once you get into here, okay, now not only can he can tell me all about what a really good splint looks like here, but he can just go, well shoot, he could also figure out how to do a leg splint. And he could also figure out how to do a whole body splint, because he understands the concept of splinting. Okay? And here, and this might be because I'm focusing on splinting, again, instead of whatever your skill set is, might not be exactly what you're looking for, but think about this. If I show John an arm splint, okay, this is a really common mistake I see in wilderness medicine. Teachers will show an arm splint, and then they think they're saving time by saying, now that you all know the arm splint, go ahead and try the leg splint. Really bad teaching. Right? Because they never even got to practice the arm splint. It's like, they're still way back here. You need to focus on the recall because they're not yet at the level of understanding. They don't understand the concept of splinting yet, so don't make them do the leg splint first. Think about what you're teaching, because I'll bet you're doing that somewhere in there. I'll bet you're pushing them too far forward, and then they're as far as improving somebody's performance. Number one, we have to start with what does really good look like, right? And that's what Anders Ericsson really emphasized. Read his book, Peak. It's in the references in the back. And he made it clear with all of his research. He said the one thing everybody has in common is if you're going to be a teacher or you're going to be a coach or you're going to be a student and you want to get good at something, you need to know really explicitly what good looks like, right? And so as the Mountaineers, let's imagine that you are a table of, you do nature walks. And you do, what you're going to do is you're going to take them out and you're going to do plant identification. Whatever your skill set is. All of you, I would encourage you to throw into the table. What you need to do is figure out what does your bullseye look like, right? What would perfect look like? Right in the middle. Those are the need to knows. And then what's up here, and what's up here, and what's up here, and let's all agree what perfect looks like. And Ericsson, again, Anders Ericsson, the expert dude, he said one of the biggest problems, or one of the greatest challenges, I should say, is that when you are trying to teach something where perfect is subjective, it's really tough. He said, when you've got something like, and he used music, I thought, to me, I was thinking music was kind of subjective, but apparently it's not. When you go to Juilliard and whatnot, they can tell what perfect is. And they can look at that person, they can look at that person, and they'll say, that person's more perfect than this person, and here's why. And so he gave examples of like chess masters, musicians, certain athletes. You can't argue with some of those. Like that's what perfect looks like, right? And then everybody has to have that mental representation. I challenge all of you to get a better idea of what does really, really good look like, okay? The second thing we're going to do is now I'm going to compare your answers. Like what does a really good answer look like or sound like? What does a really good behavior look like, okay? And now my content is going to be based on your performance against that standard. That's all the content is, okay? And then the delivery is going to be the toast. So those are the 3 steps that's involved in this. Going back to having the clear mental representation, a couple examples that are non-splint based. If I'm going to teach river crossing, I want to teach about the water, right? I want to teach about how to read a river, right? Do you want to cross where it's wide, where it's narrow? In Alaska, we actually have a little bit of it. Well, you guys got a couple glaciers here, but one of the differences here in Alaska is really hot, long spell of hot and dry. Our rivers go up because the glacier not, right? So you need to know about what makes the water go up. Is it a dam? Is it a release? Where would you cross? What are you going to wear when you cross? Are you going to wear shoes when you cross? So you're going to teach all that kind of stuff, and you need to make sure you test recall for all of that. Right, so test your students on all of that as well as the crossing itself, right? So I'm going to teach prevention or preparation. How do you know to cross? Where to cross? What method to use? All that. You're going to practice the crossing, and then I also want to make sure that if somebody wipes out, you know what to do too. Right? So that, to me, that would be kind of and I would write it all out. We could do it at the table and say, let's agree what a really good river crossing training would look like. What would if you could build a perfect river crosser, what would that person look like? Right? And then that's what you want to teach to. Okay? When it's something like a bear training, showing you bear spray and standing up here and say, this is a bear spray, here's how you use it, and spray it, that's actually not really good training. Okay? Because you didn't do it. You simply saw it. And what I'm going to talk about later today is there's a ton of data that says that if you didn't actually touch it, spray it, you will not do it in an emergency. Right? So when it comes to bear training, I'm going to teach you all about prevention. Right? I want to make sure that you know how to keep a clean camp. You need how to cook cleanly. That you know how to deter the bear. You know how to use bear spray. You know how to deal with an attack. Like again, go through the whole gamut and say this is what a perfect bear training would look like, and then train to that, okay? Very commonly, people have good intentions and they just don't have the time for it. Very commonly, people try to teach way too much in a little amount of time, right? That's the most common thing I think that we all do, is we say, oh, well, we got to do this, and this, and this, and this, and this. And the more you learn about brain science, the more you realize you almost wasted time, right? Almost all brain science now says, when I stand up here and go, nah, 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 it's not going to stick. A year from now, it's not there, right? So adding stuff to your curricula does not make your students better. It makes you feel a little better for a short term, right? It just does not retain when you do it that way.
Quick question.
Yeah.
In the previous slide, you said if you don't actually touch the bear spray, you probably won't use it. How about the river crossing? You actually have to get the
Yes, that's exactly right. Yep, they've even shown, like now, they've shown that if you don't get the AED out of the glass, if you don't turn it on, use an AED trainer and actually turn it on and do it, people will not open the glass in an emergency. Right? Anybody here, and it's not everybody, but it's a bell curve, right? So they say, and again, because it's all science, really good science. And the more I learned about that, the more I thought, you know, you're right. It's like, how many of you have actually shot a fire extinguisher? Data says that if you haven't shot it, you probably won't in an emergency because it uses this, and you're not used to it. I'm going to talk about that later. Thank you. Okay? So we really need to do a lot. We can start with the lecture, right? That's familiarity, right? But then we have to have them actually do it and then give them feedback on their progress. Okay, so this one, yes?
So using that bear spray as an example, it's not real easy to practice that. You can't just be, in fact, it might be illegal to just be, like if we were to go out back and have a training class and have 12 people spraying bear spray, I think that's illegal.
Well, it's not illegal, but that's, the point is it's dangerous perhaps. They have inert bear spray. It's all inert bear spray now. That's for training. Because of that.
They have trainers.
Yeah, they have a spray that's just an inert gas. It looks like it feels like it shoots like it, but it's not going to get in your eyes and everything. Because everybody knows that if you don't practice with bear spray, you probably won't use it in an emergency. So they actually have inert bear spray that you purchase now, that you use it for practice, but it doesn't have the pepper to it. It doesn't have any of the sting or the danger to it.
Okay, so if you're in a situation where you cannot be hands-on with the training, in other words, I agree with what you're saying, but I just see situations where you can't go there.
No, you're right.
So if you have to compromise, showing pictures, is that the best compromise? To me, it seems like it is, but I'm asking.
It's better than talking. Right, so the worst thing is just talking. The next thing is the visual, right? And then the next thing is the touching, the tactile, and doing. You can even bring the bear spray in. You can watch me. I can show you a video because we actually have more of the brain devoted to visual. Human beings do, right? So visual teaching is better for retention than auditory teaching for most people, not all people. Okay? And so, and I mean, believe me, I'm a teacher too. I wish I had more time. But I've really gotten better. The more I see the research, I used to teach this much, and now I realize I'm just making myself happy, but I'm actually not teaching that good. And the more I calm the fluff and realize what the bullseye looks like, the better I became as a teacher. And the more I did that, the more students came back, and you got it. And you actually, like, I'm like, now I'm like stoked. Hope they do well, because it's a belly raise for me. And you come in and you're like, yeah, good for you guys, yeah, you did it. And I'm thinking, I must be getting better, right? But when I used to try to cram too much in, it just doesn't retain. So when I think splits, and I'm going to come back to it, here's the little demo here, is I'm going to say, all of you probably have an idea of what good splints look like, or what good splinting is, so I'm going to remind you. Say, first of all, I want to make sure you know how to assess. So I would have taught, I'm assuming that you're familiar with this, but you may have learned it slightly different than the Wilderness Medical Associates teaches it, so I'll make sure that we're on the same page, is I'll say, I want to know whether or not, because you're going to have a broken forearm here in a sec, how do you know if it should even be splintered? Right? Because the first thing I want to know is an assessment. Is it a usable, stable arm injury, or is it an unusable, unstable arm injury? Right? That's the first thing I need to figure out. Right? And so there are some bullet points. And we say, if it is angulated or deformed, that's pretty easy. if you have either one of these, so Gail, we're going to assess Gail's arm, and if she's got angulation or deformity or crepitus, it's super easy to assess that. If she doesn't have those, then the last one that's a little more ambiguous is we say, do you have the ability to move, use, or bear weight? Do you have the ability to move this thing, to use it around, or to basically pick up a full water bottle and do this? And if you do, then you're at this end of the spectrum. We say it's a little deal, okay? That's a stable injury, okay? But if you can't, then that's a bigger deal. That's an unstable injury. So the first thing I need to do is you need to memorize how to assess, okay? So then I would cover that up and I'd say, William, what are the 3 bullet points of, I'm going to go over here so you can't cheat, okay? How do I know? So John's got an owie here. We can also splint it, but I'm not sure we should, right? And the other thing I would let you know is, if you splint something unnecessarily, it can actually create harm. Does anybody know why? That's right. Basically, it minimizes circulation. This is the same phenomenon of getting on a plane and flying to New Zealand, right? 14 hours on a plane, you didn't move your ankles. If you take your shoes off, you put your shoes on when you land in New Zealand, and all of a sudden your feet are swollen, well, it's because you didn't use your extremities. Right? Our extremities are made to be used, and by using them, that helps venous return. If you splint a body part, if you splint an arm or leg, it will swell. So I don't want to swell his arm. I don't want to splint his arm if it's not broken, because it can actually make it worse. So the first thing we have to do is assess. William, what are the 3 bullet points that prove whether or not, or that tell me whether or not we should splint? Great, so he got all 3 right. The first one, he got the concept right. So he used a different term than I did. He got the concept. It's crooked, right? So if he said crooked, good enough. He gave me the second one, the crepitus, and the third one, the weight bearing ability. So he got it perfect. He had the bullseye. And I gave you feedback, and I said, that's awesome. You got all 3, right? That's perfect. If he had only gotten 2 out of 3, so give me the third, make the third one wrong. He says, it's angulated, it's got crepitus, and the third one he says, a lot of swelling. Right? I hear that a lot. That's not correct. This is how you get feedback. I don't say, yeah, good. Hey, so he got 2 out of 3. Don't forget, that third one's not swelling. The third one's, you just took away their learning. Right? You're not going to learn unless I say, and you can, and this is the delivery, you can use this, your technique. Very commonly I'll try to use a sense of humor, because I can also come off as kind of hard. So, is I'll say 2 out of 3, 66%, D- in most places. Right? I'll bet you can do better. Right? Because I'm not cool with D-, I'll bet you're not either. Right? And you might go, I'm not going to say it that way. Okay, deliver. We still have to give the message. But the message is, you only got 2 out of 3 right. Right? And I have higher expectations for you than that. Okay? Another book's called Teach Like a Champion. Very good at giving all these techniques, including the importance of setting high expectations. Okay? So going back to this, now we can assess. Now I wonder, this A prime is called, what are we worried about? Right? So now I'm going to pick on, what's your name, Ted? Okay, Jonathan. Hey, brave man. So Jonathan, what do you think we have? So I already gave him the clue. What are we worried about? What might happen over time to the patient, to the broken arm? Anatomically, physiologically, first aid.
You might lose circulation in our hands.
That's perfect. That's exactly right. That is what we're worried about. So again, I just gave him feedback. I told him that answer is perfect. He hit the bullseye. Right? Now, a lot of times we don't even give good feedback, but we should. You need to let them know when they hit the bullseye. That is perfect. Does everybody understand? The primary concern of a broken arm has nothing to do with living or dying or shock. It has to do with whether or not the hand has appropriate circulation. Like, that's what this is all about. So now he's told me, these guys have told me that they're able to assess, that they're able to anticipate, and now I want to know, all right, let's focus on our treatment. Which is, we're going to build a splint. But the splint has to incorporate, we want to make sure that we prevent what we're worried about, and I want to make sure that my treatment is applied so that they have the best chance possible of getting out with the arm still intact, with the circulation still intact, so on and so forth, okay? So now this is the skill part of it. So I come up to here, and I'm going to say, this is what a really good splint would look like. So actually, I'm going to back up because I've got some good stuff here too. So, and how you build a good splint, it's about the principles. It's not about it has to copy me, but if you don't know splinting that well yet, I'm going to show you this splint, and the first thing I need to do is have you copy that splint, right? So again, another mistake people make is I'll build the splint, and what I will do when I teach is I have the splinting material, and once I teach this splint, as far as sequential learning, you build the splint exactly like I showed it to you. You do not deviate, you don't go, oh, well, let's say we didn't have that. No, we'll get there. Right? That's a further down the scale of blooms. The first thing I need you to do is do exactly what I just showed you to help us recall. There's actually a methodology to this. Do not let your students miss that step. Right? So I'm going to go up here and say, when I build splints, very commonly, I try to use what you will have in your backpack. I don't use SAM splints. There's no reason to carry them. They're not very comfortable. They're expensive. I'll bet I can build a splint with what you got in your backpack, what we got in the environment, and I'll bet it's even warmer and nicer than the other stuff. Right? So I'm going to use her jacket instead of a cravat and triangle bandage around the back. I'm going to make sure that the hands go back to what are we worried about? We're worried about ischemia, poor hands, cold hands. So a lot of people will leave the hand exposed because they've memorized that you got to check for perfusion. And it's like, well, if you leave your hands exposed, you're going to shell a core, your hand's going to get cold, and you're going to have bad perfusion. Okay? So we actually want to make sure that I put count heat packs in there. I put a neck gaiter in there. I put a hat over the end. I put a jacket over top of you because the most important thing is that you have good circulation. Like, that's the purpose of this. So I'm going to show you all of these things that would encompass a good splint. Your handout here talks about a splint must be complete. What does that mean? The fracture's right in here. I need to make sure that the joints on both sides of that injury do not move. If you fracture your forearm, the way we're built, if you do this, actually I got a couple slides right here. So this is the injury, right? So if you move your arm like this, you will separate the bones. If you do the arm like this, you will grind them. So the person should not do this whatsoever. So any wobbling, it's going to grind. And if it grinds, it's going to bleed right there. Thank you. It's going to swell into here. It's going to create a tourniquet, and it's going to cut off the circulation. Right? So I have to make sure that we have no wobbling. I have to make sure we have no wobbling. So I'm going to create a splint that binds this, that's super soft. Think of that as a cracked egg, and you got to get that cracked egg back to town. I mean, think about it. If you haven't get a cracked egg back to town, I put it in like a down comforter. And then I put a hard case around it, kind of like a pelican case. That's what a splint is. It's a pelican case for the arm, right? I just need to make this really soft thing to protect it, and then I need to make this hard thing around it, and then I need to make sure you don't wobble here and here, bring it up against the body, and that's a perfect splint, right? I also want, so I tend to show. So now I'm saying that I'm going to be telling you my methodology of teaching. If I'm going to teach splinting, I would have all sorts of clues for you to see, right? If you're back here, sorry, I put balloons. If you're in the recall and familiarity, you're still back there, I want to make sure you get as many clues to what good is as possible. Because you still are building your mental representation. So I will say it's a complete splint means the injury should be mobilized, protected. It should be packed. There shouldn't be any danglies off it. It should be as small as possible. It should be as comfortable as possible. Make it adjustable. You will swell. Your patient will swell. They'll swell into a splint. A sand splint with a circumferential wrap, you're going to create a tourniquet. Right? You're going to swell into it. It's going to become a tourniquet. So you have to make sure your splints are adjustable. So I'm trying to get you to understand, again, the importance of it all with the realization that really you're still back at familiarity and recall. So now I need you to keep telling me, why did I do it that way? Why did I do it that way? Let me see you do it that way. This is what I say is the bullseye, right? What is the bullseye? What's the most important thing? So the splinting is, when it comes to forearm injuries, it's all about perfusion. Okay? The treatment priorities, I'm going to focus on protecting that injury so it maintains good perfusion. And as long as you have good perfusion, it's a little deal, not life-threatening. There's no urgency. As soon as you get ischemia and you don't have good perfusion, that's a big deal. That's the bullseye of forearm splinting. Point out errors. Right? Go back and forth. Say, this is really, really good. And then especially common errors. Because people, you guys know, if you teach, you know you're going to see these common errors. Bring it up to them. Right? Very commonly what I see are things like this. And I say, well, that ring, what do you think is going to happen when they swell? That's going to be a tourniquet. A lot of hospitals don't even have, certainly get rid of your titanium rings. A lot of hospitals can't cut off titanium rings. Right? So a very common mistake is people really leave those rings on. Well, this guy right here, he has very little padding. This guy has no padding. As soon as he swells into the splint, this is not a perfect splint. It might be a functional splint, but it's not a perfect splint. Right? There's no, this guy right here, I can tell he can plot it. Right? It looks like this right here is over his, right here. Right? So right now, he's either forced to leave it straight, or if he brings it into here, it's going to dig into him. Right? So I can point out the mistakes in this. I point out mistakes in this, left the ring on. Okay? So I want to make sure that they know what perfect looks like. Right? This is what perfect looks like. This is the mental representation. These are common mistakes we see. Right? And now what I want you